The cold came first. Not the kind that bites at your fingers or stings your face, but the kind that settles deep in your chest and makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. Nietzsche felt it through the ropes binding his wrists, through the thin cloth that barely covered his shoulders, through the exhaustion that had replaced the blood in his veins. He had stopped shivering an hour ago. That was when he knew his body was giving up. He had expected many things when the riders surrounded him near the dry riverbed. He expected shouting, expected to be dragged through dust, expected the long march to whatever fort or settlement would claim him. He had prepared himself for hunger, for shame, for the eyes of strangers measuring his worth like livestock. What he had not expected was silence. The men who took him spoke little. Their faces were weathered, older than he anticipated, and they moved with the tired efficiency of people who had done this too many times before. But it was the woman who surprised him most. She appeared on the third day, emerging from a cabin that stood alone against a backdrop of pale hills and dying grass. The riders had stopped there without explanation, dismounting with the weary grunt of men who knew they could go no further without rest. Nietzsche remained on the horse, hands still bound, watching as one of the men approached the cabin and knocked. He expected another man to answer. Instead, she opened the door. She was tall, thin in the way that comes from years of carrying weight that has nothing to do with the body. Her hair was pulled back severe and grey, and her dress was dark, practical, mended in places. But it was her face that held him. Not because it was kind or cruel, but because it was unreadable. She looked at him the way someone looks at a storm approaching, with neither fear nor welcome, only acknowledgement. The riders spoke to her in low voices. Nietzsche could not hear the words, but he saw her posture shift, saw the way she crossed her arms, saw the slight tilt of her head that seemed to communicate something between refusal and negotiation. One of the men gestured toward Nietzsche. Another removed his hat and wiped his brow. The conversation stretched longer than it should have. Then she nodded once, turned, and went back inside. The men returned to their horses. One of them, a man with a thick beard streaked with grey, pulled Nietzsche down from the saddle without roughness, but without gentleness either. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. His voice was flat, factual. "Don't make trouble for her. She's done enough." Nietzsche said nothing. His legs nearly buckled when his feet hit the ground, but he steadied himself, unwilling to show weakness. The man led him toward the cabin, and the woman reappeared in the doorway, holding the door open just wide enough for them to pass through. Inside, the cabin was small, dim, and smelled of old wood and something herbal he could not name. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. A single table stood near the window, 2 chairs tucked beneath it. Shelves lined one wall, holding jars, folded cloth, a few books with cracked spines. Everything was clean, ordered, spare. The bearded man cut the ropes from Nietzsche's wrists without ceremony. "Behave," he said, and left. The door closed. The woman stood near the hearth, her back to him, stirring something in a pot that hung over the flames. Nietzsche remained near the entrance, unsure whether to sit, to speak, to move at all. His wrists ached where the ropes had been. He flexed his fingers slowly, feeling the blood return in sharp tingles. She did not look at him. Minutes passed. The fire crackled. Outside he heard the riders mounting their horses, heard the sound of hooves fading into distance. And then there was only silence, and the woman, and the strange weight of being inside 4 walls that were not his own. Finally she spoke. "Sit." Her voice was low, steady, neither warm nor cold. Nietzsche hesitated, then moved toward the table and lowered himself into one of the chairs. His body protested. Every muscle felt bruised, every joint stiff. He had not sat in a chair in longer than he could remember. She ladled something from the pot into a wooden bowl, then brought it to the table and set it in front of him. Steam rose from the surface. It was broth, pale and simple, with bits of chicken and soft vegetables floating inside. The smell hit him like a blow. His stomach twisted with sudden, desperate hunger. But he did not move. She returned to the hearth, retrieved a folded blanket from a chest near the wall, and placed it on the table beside the bowl. Then she sat in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and watched him with that same unreadable expression. "Eat," she said. Nietzsche looked down at the bowl, then back at her. Shame rose hot in his throat. He was a prisoner. He was supposed to be hungry, cold, humiliated. He was supposed to be nothing, and yet here was food, warmth, a blanket. He did not understand. He did not trust it. "Why?" he asked. His voice came out rougher than he intended, barely more than a rasp. She did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved from his face to his hands, to the raw marks on his wrists, then back to his eyes. "Because you'll freeze if you don't eat," she said, "and I won't have that happen under my roof." It was not kindness in her voice. It was something else. Duty, perhaps, or something older, something she carried that he could not yet see. He picked up the spoon. His hand shook slightly. He told himself it was only the cold. He brought the broth to his lips and drank. It was warm, almost hot, and it slid down his throat like a mercy he had not asked for. He ate slowly, deliberately, trying to preserve some dignity even as his body screamed for more. She watched him the entire time, silent, unmoving. When he finished, she took the bowl without a word, refilled it, and set it before him again. He stared at her, confused, suspicious. She only nodded toward the bowl. He ate the second serving more quickly. The warmth spread through his chest, his limbs, pushing back the cold that had settled so deep. When he was done, she took the bowl again and placed it in a basin near the hearth. Then she picked up the blanket and held it out to him. "You'll sleep there," she said, gesturing toward a corner of the room where a thin mattress lay on the floor, covered with old but clean linens. "I'll be in the next room, don't try to leave. There's nowhere to go and you won't make it far in your condition." Nietzsche took the blanket. It was heavy, wool, worn soft from use. He wanted to ask again why she was doing this, what she wanted from him, what price would come later. But exhaustion pulled at him like a tide, and the words would not form. She turned toward a narrow door on the far side of the room. Before she reached it, she paused and looked back at him. For the first time, something shifted in her expression, not warmth, but perhaps a flicker of something human beneath the stone. "My name is Sarah," she said. "You don't need to tell me yours." Then she disappeared into the other room, and Nietzsche was alone. He stood there for a long moment, holding the blanket, staring at the closed door. Then he moved to the corner, lowered himself onto the mattress, and pulled the blanket over his shoulders. The fire still burned low in the hearth, casting shifting shadows across the walls. He lay on his side, his body finally beginning to relax, and closed his eyes. But sleep did not come easily. His mind circled the strangeness of the night, the unexpected mercy, the woman's face. He thought of the stories he had heard, stories of settlers who hated his people with a fury that could not be reasoned with. He thought of the women who had lost husbands, children, homes. He had been prepared to meet that hatred head-on. He had not been prepared for this. Somewhere in the night, exhaustion won. He drifted into uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with fragments of sound and color, with voices he could not understand and faces he could not place. When he woke, pale light filtered through the single window. The fire had burned down to embers. He sat up slowly, his body still aching, but no longer numb. The smell of something cooking reached him, and he turned to see Sarah at the hearth stirring a pot of something that steamed gently. She did not greet him. She simply ladled the contents into a bowl, brought it to the table and set it down. Then she poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and placed it beside the bowl. "Eat," she said, just as she had the night before. He rose, moved to the table and sat. This time, he did not hesitate. He ate slowly, methodically, and when he finished, she took the bowl and refilled it again without asking. He ate the second serving, drank the water, and felt strength returning to his limbs in small, grudging increments. Sarah sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own cup of water. She did not drink. She only watched him, her expression still distant, still guarded. "How long do you plan to keep me here?" he asked. "I don't plan anything," she said. "The riders will come back when they're ready. Could be tomorrow, could be longer." "And until then?" "Until then, you're here." He studied her face, searching for deception, for cruelty, for anything that made sense. "You lost someone," he said quietly. It was not a question. Her jaw tightened slightly. For a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she set her cup down and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "I lost everyone," she said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Nietzsche felt something shift in his chest, something uncomfortably close to recognition. He knew that tone. He had heard it in his own voice, in the voices of the elders who spoke of the old days, of the people who were no longer there. "Then why?" he asked. "Why do this?" She looked away toward the window, toward the pale hills beyond. "Because someone did it for me once," she said. "A long time ago." She did not elaborate. She rose from the table, took his bowl and placed it in the basin. Then she moved to the shelves, retrieved a small jar, and brought it back to the table. She opened it, revealing a thick, pale salve that smelled faintly of herbs and something sharp. "Your wrists," she said, nodding toward his hands. He looked down. The skin was raw, red, broken in places from the ropes. He had not thought about it, had pushed the pain into the background where it could not distract him. But now, seeing it through her eyes, he felt the sting return. She held out her hand. Slowly, he extended his arm. She took his wrist gently, her fingers cool and dry, and began to apply the salve with careful, practiced motions. The sting intensified briefly, then faded into a dull, bearable ache. She worked in silence, wrapping his wrist with a strip of clean cloth when she was done, then repeated the process with his other hand. When she finished, she stepped back and returned the jar to the shelf. Nietzsche stared at his bandaged wrists, at the care that had been taken, and felt something he could not name twist inside him. Gratitude, confusion, shame. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," she replied. The day passed slowly. Sarah moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, tending to small tasks, mending a torn piece of cloth, sweeping the floor, checking the fire. Nietzsche sat near the window, watching the land outside, watching her. She did not speak unless necessary, and he did not press her. By evening, she prepared another meal, this time with bread and dried meat alongside the broth. They ate together at the table, the silence between them no longer quite as heavy. When they finished, she cleared the dishes, and he offered to help. She hesitated, then nodded toward the basin. He washed the bowls carefully, unsure of the protocol, unsure if he was overstepping. She dried them with a cloth and returned them to the shelf. Then she brought out the blanket again and handed it to him. "Same place," she said. He took it, moved to the corner and lay down. This time sleep came easier. The warmth of the food, the weight of the blanket, the strange safety of the small cabin, all conspired to pull him under. On the second day, Sarah spoke more. Not much, but enough. She told him the riders were militia, not soldiers. She told him they patrolled the region looking for anyone who did not belong. She did not say what would happen to him when they returned, and he did not ask. He told her his name. She repeated it once, testing the sound, then nodded. "You're far from home," she said. "Yes." "Do you have family?" He hesitated. "I did." She did not ask what happened. She only nodded, as if she already understood. That afternoon she went outside to tend a small garden behind the cabin. Nietzsche watched from the window as she knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds, checking the soil. Her movements were slow, deliberate. The movements of someone who had done this 1,000 times and would do it 1,000 more. He thought about running. The door was not locked. She was outside. He could take what little he needed and disappear into the hills before she even noticed. But something kept him still. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the knowledge that she was right, that he would not make it far. Or perhaps it was something else, something he could not yet name. When she came back inside, her hands were dirty, her face slightly flushed from the work. She washed her hands in a bucket near the door, then returned to the hearth to prepare the evening meal. On the third night, after they had eaten, after the fire had burned low, Sarah sat in the chair across from him and folded her hands in her lap. Her expression was different now, not softer, but less guarded, as if she had made a decision. "I need to tell you something," she said. Nietzsche waited. She looked down at her hands, at the lines and scars that marked them. 20 years ago, she began, I was traveling west with my husband. I was pregnant. We were young, stupid, thought we could make a new life out here. We got separated from our group during a storm. Our wagon broke down. We were lost. She paused, her jaw working slightly, as if the words were difficult to shape. I went into labor early. My husband tried to find help, but he didn't come back. I was alone, in pain, terrified. I thought I would die out there. I thought my baby would die. Nietzsche felt his chest tighten. He knew where this was going, but he did not interrupt. "A woman found me," Sarah continued. "An Apache woman. She was older, maybe 50, maybe more. She didn't speak English. I didn't speak her language. But she understood. She stayed with me through the night. She brought water, herbs, cloth. She helped me deliver my son." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she steadied herself. "She stayed with us for 2 days. She made sure I could walk, made sure the baby was strong. Then she left. I never saw her again. I never even knew her name." Sarah looked up at Nietzsche, and for the first time he saw grief in her eyes. Raw, unhealed, ancient grief. "My husband came back on the 3rd day. We made it to a settlement. But my son, he only lived 6 months. Fever took him. And my husband, he died 5 years after that. Conflict near the border. I've been alone ever since." She wiped her eyes quickly, almost angrily, as if ashamed of the tears. "I never forgot her," Sarah said. "That woman. I never forgot what she did. I owed her everything, and I never got to tell her." Nietzsche's throat felt tight. He stared at Sarah, at the lines of her face, at the way her hands trembled slightly in her lap. And then, slowly, carefully, he spoke. "What did she look like?" Sarah blinked, surprised by the question. She had long hair, mostly grey. She wore it in a braid down her back. She had a scar here. Sarah touched her own cheek near her jaw. And her hands, they were strong. She moved like someone who had worked hard her whole life. Nietzsche felt the air leave his lungs. He closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw her, his grandmother, the woman who had raised him when his mother died, the woman who had taught him to track, to listen, to survive, the woman who had disappeared on a foraging trip 20 years ago and never returned. "Her name was Dolly," he said quietly. Sarah's eyes widened. "You knew her. She was my grandmother." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at him, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Nietzsche opened his eyes and met her gaze, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Grief, gratitude, the weight of a debt that could never be repaid, but had somehow impossibly been recognized. "She never came home," Nietzsche said. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "We searched for weeks. We thought she had been taken or killed. We never knew what happened." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. If I had known." "You couldn't have," Nietzsche interrupted gently. "She chose to help you. She chose to stay. That was who she was." Sarah shook her head, the tears spilling over now. "She saved my life. She saved my son, even if only for a little while. I owed her everything." "And now you've repaid it," Nietzsche said. She looked at him, her face stricken. "I can't repay that. I could never—" "You already have," he said firmly. "You gave me food. You gave me warmth. You treated my wounds. You didn't have to. You could have let me freeze, let me starve. But you didn't, because of her." Sarah wiped her eyes roughly, trying to compose herself. "The riders will come back," she said, her voice thick. "Maybe tomorrow. They'll take you to the fort. I can't stop that. I know. But tonight," she said, her voice steadying, "tonight you are not a prisoner. Tonight you are a guest in my home. Because I owe that to her. I owe that to Dolly." Nietzsche felt his own eyes sting. He nodded, unable to speak. They sat together in silence for a long time, the fire burning low, the night settling around them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters, whispering through the gaps in the walls. But inside there was warmth, there was food, there was the fragile, unexpected gift of understanding. When Sarah finally rose and handed him the blanket, her hand lingered on his for just a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me her name." "Thank you," Nietzsche replied, "for remembering her." She nodded, then retreated to her room. Nietzsche lay down in the corner, the blanket pulled tight around him, and stared at the ceiling. He thought of his grandmother, of the strength in her hands, of the way she had sung to him when he was small. He thought of the woman she had saved, and the son who had lived only 6 months, and the husband who had died in a conflict that made no sense. He thought of Sarah, alone in this cabin, carrying the memory of a kindness she could never repay, until the day a prisoner arrived at her door. The world was cruel and strange, and full of losses that could not be undone. But it was also full of moments like this, small, quiet, impossible moments, where the past reached forward and the present reached back, and two people who should have been enemies found something else instead. The riders came the next morning. Nietzsche heard them before he saw them, the sound of hooves on hard earth, the jingle of metal, the low voices of men. Sarah heard them too. She moved to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. Nietzsche rose from the mattress, folded the blanket carefully and placed it on the table. He heard voices outside, heard Sarah speaking in low, firm tones. He could not make out the words, but he heard the cadence, the negotiation, the finality. Then the door opened, and the bearded man stepped inside. "Time to go," he said. Nietzsche nodded. He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at Sarah. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face once again unreadable. But her eyes were not. Her eyes held something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. "Tell them about her," she said quietly. "Tell your people about Dolly. Tell them she was brave." "I will," Nietzsche promised. The bearded man gestured impatiently. Nietzsche stepped outside into the cold morning air. The other riders waited on their horses, their faces tired, their postures weary. One of them handed him a canteen of water. Another offered a piece of dried bread. Small mercies, perhaps influenced by Sarah's insistence, perhaps not. They rode away from the cabin, and Nietzsche did not look back. But he felt her watching until they disappeared over the first hill. Days later, when he was finally released, traded, sent back to what remained of his people, he told them the story. Some believed him. Others thought grief and captivity had confused his memory. But he told it anyway, again and again, until it became part of the oral history, a story about a grandmother who saved a stranger, and a stranger who saved her grandson 20 years later, and the invisible thread of debt and gratitude that connected them across time and enmity. And in a small cabin on the edge of nowhere, Sarah lived the rest of her years alone, tending her garden, mending her clothes, keeping the fire burning. She never spoke of the prisoner again. But sometimes, on cold nights, she would sit by the hearth and whisper a name into the flames, "Dolly," and the fire would crackle in response, as if somewhere, somehow, the debt had finally been acknowledged. Some encounters change what we believe about the enemy. Some debts are paid in ways we never expect, and some acts of mercy, given without hope of recognition, ripple forward through time until they find the exact person who needed to know that kindness, once given, is never truly lost. If stories like this stay with you, if they remind you that history is made of human moments as much as it is made of conflict, consider subscribing. These memories are fragile. They deserve to be remembered.